自由国家の安全や承に必要な自分に規制された民兵国民が武器を保有し切り絵を持つ権利は侵害されない。
The question of what exactly the Second Amendment guarantees U.S. citizens is at the core of the gun control debate. The Supreme Court has ruled on the specifics of the Second Amendment several times throughout history, and it's these cases which we'll be exploring today. One of the first Supreme Court cases to mention the Second Amendment was Dred Scott v. Sandford. In this case, the Second Amendment was mentioned in an argument against Scott, saying that were the court to allow Scott citizenship, and by extension allow black people to become citizens, then they would be afforded all the rights that came with citizenship, including the right to bear arms under the Second Amendment. The mention of the Second Amendment in this manner cemented its position alongside the other rights afforded in the Bill of Rights, and also set the precedent for the interpretation of the Second Amendment as an individual citizen's right rather than a collective right of a group. Cases passed through the court following Dred Scott that touched upon the Second Amendment, but none affected the precedent surrounding the Second Amendment as much as the U.S. v. Miller case in 1939. Miller was a case brought to the Supreme Court concerning the constitutionality of the National Firearms Act, a law passed by Congress which, among other things, required the registration and licensing of certain firearms to transport said firearms across state lines. The plaintiff, Jack Miller and Frank Layton, were indicted for trying to transport a double-barrel sawed-off shotgun across state borders, and appealed their case to the U.S. District Court, which agreed with Miller and Layton that the NFA was unconstitutional, and so the case was appealed once more to the United States Supreme Court. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that no, the NFA was constitutional because the Second Amendment protected the rights to assemble and arm a militia, and a sawed-off shotgun was in no way necessary for that. This ruling was new in that it adjusted the precedent surrounding the Second Amendment and weakening the claim that the amendment protected the right to own any arms without restriction. At the time, this notion was not, however, revolutionary. At the time, even opponents of gun control conceded that no person outside of our national defense units and police has any legal use for such weapons because they have no sporting or hunting value, being made for the sole purpose of taking human life. This was the spirit of the NFA as well, which is why the act focused solely on machine guns, short-barreled rifles, and silencers. The target was the weapons which form the arsenal of the gangster and desperado. As the U.S. is quoted and saying in this case, the Second Amendment does not, we submit, guarantee to the criminal the right to maintain and utilize arms which are particularly adaptable to his purposes. This precedent held for almost 70 years, and under it several more pieces of gun control legislation appeared. This is up until 2008, when the Supreme Court took on the DOC v. Heller case. District of Columbia v. Heller was a case which concerned a District of Columbia law which outlawed unregistered firearms as well as prohibiting registration of handguns outside of 1-year licenses that could be issued by the chief of police. In addition to this, citizens with legally registered firearms were still required to keep said firearms either disassembled or bound by trigger lock when in their home. Police officer Dick Anthony Heller had a problem with this. The court ruled with Heller 5-4. The handgun law is unconstitutional as it violates District of Columbia citizens' Second Amendment rights. One of the most contested points in the gun control debate is the claim that any and all regulations or qualifiers put in the way of purchasing a firearm are a violation of the Second Amendment. Were the Supreme Court to rule in any significant way on this issue, it would likely tip the debate in favor of one side or the other. Until then, we have nothing more than what conflicting precedent has already been set and our own beliefs. The Second Amendment was written at a time in which guns, states, military power, and people all behaved very differently. Is the Second Amendment even necessary in today's America? Some say not. Some say more than ever. Point is, we have to work with what we have to ensure the United States we know and love can have it all, security and freedom, whatever form that may take. Pew.